Hey, welcome to the Tune-In, Episode 1. My name is Ben Tyree. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a guitar player, musician, composer, producer, painter living in Brooklyn, New York. For those who do know me, then you know I'm your pal and your confidant. First things first, I need you to subscribe. Click this red button down here. It costs you nothing and you have everything to gain. Also, if you like our endeavors here and want to support the show, you can donate at Ben Tyree at Venmo and $Ben Tyree at Cash App. You can visit my website to learn more about me, www.bentyree.net, where you will find my store, where you can buy one of my many CD releases. Yes, these are CDs. I still listen to them. I still sell them. People still buy them, believe it or not. And they go directly to the artist. So if you have friends who sell CDs, you should buy one. So let's see. Without further ado, the first guest tonight is a dear friend of mine, Gupta, who is known as one of the few percussionists simultaneously representing the traditions of American jazz on drumset and Indian classical music on tabla. After getting his degree in European classical percussion, he completed his jazz studies learning from his peers on the bandstands in San Francisco and Oakland to Harlem and Brooklyn. He developed an interest and love of tabla, which helped guide him to become a co-founder of the nonprofit collective Brooklyn Raga Massive. Today, he lives in Brooklyn, NYC, and is actively involved in performing, curating, producing, and teaching privately, as well as through various institutions. He's also a very dear friend of mine. He's my neighbor. We have a project together called Unruly Neighbors, and we put out an album called Unruly Neighbors together in June that we did during COVID quarantine, all remotely, of course. And it's a pretty cool conversational, improvisational record between a percussionist and a guitar player. So, without further ado, through the magic of technology and crossfading, we will have Samir Gupta. Samir, what's happening?
Ben, man, thank you, man. It's good to be here, bro. I'm doing good.
Of course. You're guest number one. How does it feel?
I'm really honored because I know you have quite a Rolodex, Ben. And I believe my exact words were, don't you want somebody famous to kick off your special podcast?
Well, you actually are pretty famous, believe it or not. Like, you're kind of a big deal in Prospect Heights, Brooklyn.
Yeah, I think definitely as far as this house that I live in, I'm a big deal in this house for sure.
So that's your studio you got set up, huh?
Yep, this is my studio. I've been able to kind of refine it a little bit more during the quarantine, but yeah, this is where I spend quite a bit of time. Thankfully, I get my family to support me in making sure I get down here earlier in the day so that the rest of the day I'm not as cranky.
I asked you that as if I haven't been there like many, many times.
No, you have been here times.
Like, are those your drums, dude?
I got those drums as special for this session just so I could make it look like I'm a drummer.
So you're kind of rigged up there with mics. Are you working on anything in particular?
I mean, I definitely have like a few projects that I'm in the flow with. I guess I don't necessarily put too many like big project deadlines on myself, but I do like to feel like I have like, you know, an improvisational flow, a sort of situation that I could step into maybe just for like a 30-minute window and be creative and lay down some keyboards, lay down some guitar, like, you know, lay down drums, of course. So to have that flexibility and to have like everything in place, I think is really important for me. So I can just kind of like get into it. And as far as my days, like I have 2 kids, and so it's really hard to like find long periods of time. So it's good to just have everything ready to go.
I was just doing I just decided to do a random OBS broadcast of some old gig I did, and you know, without telling anyone beforehand. Mm-hmm. And the biggest fear is that my connection is going to crap out, you know, which it of course did, because I have Optimum, you know. What are you going to do? Like, do you have Optimum online? This is not a plug.
I go up to Google And I see like when they're going to put in the Google fiber optic sort of structures for us to be able to get like Google like based internet service, which I think would be killing. Personally, I feel like I've done Optimum, done Verizon, I've done all these things. All of them suck. So like, the only thing worth checking out is like a total, like something that's completely different, like Google or something. Like for Google to do internet is interesting, you know. Like I find those kinds of things kind of more compelling. It's like, so a place or any kind of idea that's like, just like, okay, let's like look at all the stuff that's going wrong and like try and really fix it, you know. So I don't know. I think Google is not like some like great anything to me, but just I think that like approach is kind of cool. Like to just like not get stuck in these ruts where like you constantly are just like kind of thinking that because it's the way it's been done, like that's the way to do it.
Right.
So I feel like like a lot of mentality that drives like the growth mindset behind like not just accepting things for what they are, but like always work to improve. That always really speaks to me. So
I love that. I love that about you. Yeah, that's why you're an amazing drummer and parent.
oh, thank you. That's very nice of you.
Yeah.
No, it's
So,
really awesome being a parent like that, because it's like I think that for my kids, well, my older one, of course, my younger one is so small right now, but like my older one has a lot of struggle with like just making mistakes and being comfortable with like not being perfect. And it's such a fine line, because I think that for me as a musician, I'm always trying to like in a way be perfect, but then I'm also willing to break that perfectness in the service of some sort of development. So it's kind of cool. Like it's like Miles, you know, it's like Miles Davis is like, you know, when you make a mistake, it's like you can actually like make that mistake into something new and a new idea, right? So it's like that mentality of always being able to clean up any mess, right?
I was talking about that on when I did the Brooklyn Raga Massive clinic before Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
For some reason, Neil asked me if I would do some kind of alt tuning and just improvise. And so I did that, and it kind of revealed all these different philosophies of approaching improvisation. Yeah. One of which being this idea of not judging what you're playing while you're playing it, especially if you're improvising. Mm-hmm. And when you hit a wrong note that your brain is like, oh, that's a wrong note, you like milk it.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
Totally.
Like you just like really
sense.
Lay on that. Yeah. And yeah, I love that. I love kind of practicing
it's almost
that.
like it's like the idea, you know how they say like, or like Wayne Shorter's famous quote lately has been like, jazz means I dare you.
Right. I love that.
I also really like that. And I also think there's like almost another side to it, which is like jazz and like a lot of like free jazz too, I think in particular, like it's just all about saying, if someone says like you can only go right here, right? You can only make like a right turn. It's like you're basically just gonna be like watch me make a left right now. Like you know? And it's like that kind of also that attitude, like, you know, just cause that is the way it's been done, like I'm actually going to show you the other thing, you know, and I'm going to like, and it's going to make you think I'm messing up, but like that's actually in service of something that's like outside of this sphere right now, maybe, you know?
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Do you have like I can say that I do, but do you have sort of a balance? For instance, like what I like to do is when I'm practice things from a very kind of left brain place, like with rules, focusing on very specific things and trying to zoom in and perfect something. Mm-hmm. And then when I am on the bandstand or recording or improvising or whatever, I try to just like flip the switch and turn all that off and go completely right-brained. Do you ever experience that or consciously try to engage in that way?
Yeah, I mean, I think I sort of, sometimes I think I realize too late that I'm accessing maybe a more just like technical and technique based, and maybe something that's more like I practiced this and I'm going to play it because I practiced it. And like then I realize I just am doing that, right? It's like I'm in this space suddenly where I'm just like, what's going on here? Like, am I really engaged with like, you know, all the different elements that are kind of coming together right now, or am I just like in my own head? You know, and a lot of times it's hard, I think, for me to separate those two like preemptively, right? Because it's like the ideas are flowing, and I think the reason, of course, we practice in such a rigid way is because like we want to call upon those things when we're performing, and then we want it to sound, ideally we want it to sound very natural and very like genuine and like something that's kind of manifested spontaneously, but like it's not, right? Like it is something that like we have trained our hands and fingers to do, you know, most of the time. And so I think that it's like it's very hard to find that balance. Like you're saying, it is a balance, right? You want to be able to have both things at the same time,
Right.
and I think that's extremely challenging.
And I think one feeds into the other. Like when I was in college, I had this professor, Charlie Young, who was the jazz improv professor at Howard University. And one of the other guitar students, Rodney, who's a good friend, he was getting into transcribing way before I was. And he would always try to, I mean, like we all were doing, trying to kind of throw licks in here and there. And one time he was just really in it. And he like, this West Montgomery lick just came out. And it was obviously like in the zone, unpremeditated. And Charlie Young like stopped him and was like, see what just happened there? That was real improvisation because it just came out. You weren't thinking about it. Like, so I feel like there's that you bolster both muscles, or I guess, or both sides of it, and they feed into the other.
It's such a good point. I mean, because for me personally, I also experience, because I play tabla and drum set, right? And I play them both in very separated ways at times, but then I also bring them together. But one thing I've noticed is that my ear, I have to kind of reacclimate my ear to like the context in which that music originally exists, right? So like I have to kind of listen to some Indian classical music. I have to listen to like, you know, and kind of marinate in that sound for a minute before I can actually create, I think, that sound. And it's the same thing with jazz stuff, right? So if I'm like listening to a bunch of tabla Indian classical music and I go and do a jazz gig where the context is maybe a little bit more traditional, like it's going to be a little bit challenging for me to like change direction. And that direction isn't just like a technique thing, right? It's actually like, it's like a poise, and it's like a, you know, it's a stance with the music. It's like, how do you play the time? How do you sit with the pulse? You know, all of those things are so deeply ingrained. It's like, how do you speak that language, right? So it's very interesting. And then of course, like bringing tabla and drum set together that's usually, I save that for like those very, very creative situations where I'm given, a great green light by my fellow musicians to say, go for it. And it's not in any kind of tradition, quotes,
Well, I have a question then. So for those who don't know, you actually started on drum set and then came to tabla later, correct?
Yeah, that's right. I spent a lot of time on drum set and sort of made a lot of my career as a jazz drummer and as a drummer who notoriously would not conform to like a lot of the expectations and maybe stereotypes of like the styles. But I sort of reflected on that in myself, and I think I found great musicians who understood like what I was doing, and they encouraged that kind of like breaking of rules. And I feel very, very lucky for some of those, for a lot of those musicians from the Bay Area in San Francisco. Mm-hmm. And then in the Bay Area, there's also a very, very rich Indian classical scene. There's a lot of history of Indian classical music in the Bay. So I was really lucky to connect with some amazing musicians, Indian classical musicians who encouraged me, and they, really like sat down with me and were like, these are the recordings to listen to. It's not just Ravi Shankar and Alaraka, and so it's like really took the time to educate me, and that was like a profound learning experience, almost 4 years of total immersion.
Yeah.
And then around that time, I started to connect with Mark Carey, who's a fantastic keyboardist and pianist and composer and producer in Harlem, originally from DC. Like
so you met him in New York, though?
I actually met him in the Bay Area. And the funny thing is I was like spinning his albums on my college radio station. Mm-hmm. And I already knew like that I thought he was one of the sickest, post-bop piano players. Like he was he was just kicking all the sick bass lines with his left hands and vamps, and was very much into like some modal exploration. And actually a really cool story is that I basically listened to his record called Trillium, which is has Nasheed Waits and Taurus Mateen, and it's a fantastic record by Mark. And there's a moment on the end of one of the blues, they do a song that's a blues on there. I can't remember what they call it on there. But the melody's like bump, 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 bump. You know, that's kind of it. It's like this call, right? But at the end of that track that's on the record, like I was listening to it and I was like, man, they sound like they get off right there a little bit. And then they just went into this whole other section that was like just gorgeous and totally not like the rest of the track. And I was like, oh man, that sounds like some really, really spontaneous music making. You know, I was deep into that space when I was in the Bay Area. I had a group called the Supplicants, which basically would just do as purely spontaneous improvisation as we could possibly do, where we wouldn't even really talk before we would play. We wouldn't have any kind of plan. And it was just like go music. And so it was very, very powerful for me. And so I kind of connected with that part of Mark's song. I was like, I felt that vibe there. And I finally met Mark. You know, I was basically through a friend. They were like, you know, you come over to Samir's house, you got to meet this drummer. So like Mark comes over, and it was like so cool to meet him. And then I straight up asked him this question. I was like, hey man, at like 4 minutes and 45 seconds, like this happened. And did you guys like get off here and decide to just improvise purely and work off of a mistake? And he was like, yeah, man, that's like exactly what happened. And he really dug that I think that I like honed in on that. And I think that ever since then we had a very, very profound connection. And then he was the one who was really like, you know, Samir, you need to do tabla and drum set at the same time. And he was really the one who pushed me to do that. I mean, he pushed me in the way that I needed to be pushed, which was just like, don't stop it just being uncomfortable, right? Like, like there's something there.
Yes.
You have to work through your uncomfortableness to kind of get to that reward. And it's taken years, but he was totally right. And I think that for me, it's like such a rich territory now to just be able to explore both, and also to just tap into some of the history around that, like Trilok Gurtu and like, you know, just amazing musicians who've kind of really gone there, you know.
That's funny. What you just said. It's a conversation I have with lots of musicians, and I'll give you an example. 10 years ago, I was doing a record release gig at Brooklyn Academy of Music, and it was being recorded, and I didn't like how I sounded in real time. Like when I was doing the gig, I just felt very awkward, very uncomfortable. You know, I'm sure you felt that way.
Oh man.
And I just felt like I had failed. And then, you know, people were coming up to me and they were really complimentary, and I sold like a lot of CDs, and it was a good night, but I kind of felt like kind of an emptiness. Like, I didn't do as well as I would have liked to, but they recorded it. And so the board, they recorded it, and then I had a guy filming it. And later on, I listened to the audio of it, and it was not what I remember at all. Like, it was like totally like like I was slaying it. Like it was right in the pocket and just like boom.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, this is like some of the best playing I've ever heard myself do in retrospect. Why is it that I had to feel that way creating it?
Yeah.
And so I have to ask myself that question every gig. Like, you know, if you don't feel good making the music, yet the result is something that is amazing and makes other people feel great. Like, how do you reconcile that? Like, how do you kind of, and I don't know if you've ever experienced that where maybe I'm just too hard on myself, but I know a lot of people.
I think I definitely do that. I would say that it happens often, honestly, for me. And, you know, I think that there is a part of me, like, I mean, I trust the people in my life, like my wife and people who are close to me when they tell me, you know, you're being too hard on yourself. Like, I think that you have to listen to those people too, right? But like, I do think that we have a tendency as musicians and as musicians who play music that like sets a very high standard, that I think it's probably a combination of things. I mean, one is that like we are just kind of like we were always in a state of pursuance, right? And so that's like that striving is like is kind of when it is done, I think that there is an emptiness, right? Because it's like what is that thing that we're tapping into when we're there on stage, and there's energy and there's momentum and there's storytelling and all these things happening, and it's like magical. I mean, I miss that so much as a musician in quarantine. You know, it's like there is magic there. There's like a certain undescribable thing, and then the gig's done, or even as the gig's going, you're slowly creating an emptiness there, right? Like you know, it's like you're saying bye to this moment at the same time, right? So I think that's a very interesting sense of sadness there. But then I think that there's times where I felt really just exhilarated and like so much in the moment, right? That it's just like, it doesn't matter, right? And I think that's kind of the goal for me nowadays, is like, it has to be like a letting go of our own kind of ego and our own expectation and our own like self-judgment, right? Like in a way it's not helping just the act that's being done, right? And I think that was something that a friend of mine, David Boyce, fantastic saxophonist and a really great teacher, he told me that, I think, when I was being very self-critical, and he was just like, you know, the gesture alone is beautiful, and it needs to just, sometimes you just need to stop there, because like that is enough to connect to a lot of people, right? The fact that like you came out and you did this and you made a moment that was translated into some sort of musical expression. Maybe that was a visual expression for someone. It could have been a spiritual expression. You know, it's like, that's not up for us to decide, right? Like we did the gesture. And I think that he was trying to help me understand that like that itself is such a huge value. And so to put anything else on it is kind of almost like not being fair, you know?
I love that. Can you take us back to how you got started playing drum set and your musical journey, as it were?
Yeah. Wow, that's fun. So I was living in Japan, in Tokyo actually, and I was going to an American school in Japan, and it was elementary school, so it was like third grade. And I remember the music teacher basically kind of having a cassette of Bach, and I was super duper into it. I like asked to borrow the tape, I wore it out, and then I think the next year then I was able to sort of like get in band, like the concert band, and an interesting microaggression, I guess, of sorts. Like I was the only brown person there basically, and I wanted to play what was the instrument? I don't even think I got to say what instrument I wanted to play. I think they looked at me and they were like, "He should play trombone."
What?
And it was sort of
like of all things, like
of all things, and it's like, because your lips are, they said, because your lips are like, you know, thicker and like trombone lips. I was like, okay, whatever.
That's weird.
It was very strange, and I reflect on that a little nowadays too. But I just couldn't get my head around like the slide and the positioning and how that was like translating to the written music. Like I just sucked.
Right.
And so then they eventually figured out that I sucked, and then they were like, well, maybe you should play drums. And I got over onto the drums, and I just like was like a fish to water, you know. Like they started us out on playing on music stands, like just turned flat, and so it was just like sticks hitting metal. And I just like within like a class or two, they were like, oh, like you should be able to play on drums, like you can control your sticks and like you can get on a real drum. So that was really cool. Like that was some affirmation for me, like, oh wow, you know, you're good at this. And they were like sort of surprised. And then after 3 years in Japan, we moved back to New York State, just like closer to Croton on the Hudson.
Oh yeah.
And I was a little accelerated from my fellow students, because like Japan, they're just like much more academically rigorous, right? So
when was this? High school?
This was probably no. This was actually just when I was about to get into middle school. So I was like third grade to sixth grade or second to fifth grade, I was in Tokyo and I finished elementary school. And then sixth grade, I came back to New York. And it was very awkward, like, coming back into middle school, not knowing anybody. And so the only thing that I had was really playing drums in the concert band. And it was just really cool because I was able to like get behind the drums quickly. I was able to read music and get into it right away. And everything was like fairly straightforward for me at that point. And then I saw someone playing drum set and I was like, oh my God, like I never saw that before. Like all the drums, like the feet and the hands. And I was just like hooked, I needed to figure out how to do that. And I remember just getting lessons really early on up there. And then I sort of heard an amazing drummer in the high school that I went to, and just playing jazz stuff and just full on into it, throwing down really, really hard. And I was like, oh my God, this is really, really, this is where it's at. And I got into jazz band then. And I remember getting into jazz band at at my first year in high school, which kind of was like that wasn't really done before, right? So like the other high school drummers basically convinced me to not join jazz band so that they could get more songs to play on. And so I was like, I was so excited that I got into jazz band, right? And then I was like, okay, yeah, I'll wait till next year. And then turned out one of the drummers was like totally a slacker and he was just like missing rehearsal after rehearsal. So they invited me back a month later and I was just like so psyched, and that was like a taste of like a lot of the standard high school jazz band related stuff. And so then that was that was like ninth grade. And then actually I moved to California at that time. And so that was again like a little rough. My dad worked for IBM at that time in our lives. And so it was like every 3 years it was like a different place. And that last move to the Bay Area was actually him kind of breaking off of that and pursuing his own interests in tech and in, Silicon Valley and stuff.
So, but were you born in the Bay Area? Yeah, right?
I was, yeah. So
Yeah.
I was born there in 1976 and then moved like to Minnesota for a few years and then New York and then Japan, then back to New York and then back to California. And then now I'm back here in New York.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow.
So basically drum set kind of was like the main thing that I was interested in all through high school. And then college came and I was like, I need to kind of figure out what I'm going to do. I want to do music. And for some reason, and I'm sure it was just a product of, the world and where we were at the time as a society, I was like, European classical music. I need to be trained in European classical music. And so I just kind of focused on going to a department that could train me in classical percussion. And I realized about a year or two into it, I was like, oh man, like I'm going to leave here and just go straight to playing drum set and like gigging. I'm not going to go and join an orchestra. As much as I loved playing symphonic music and orchestral music and timpani and mallets and Carmino Burana and Porgy and Bess and like all the great hits, that was my college experience for the most part. I mean, as far as like my degree. So like outside of the degree, I was all on drum set. And it was like I was kind of doing a lot of community, more like music, almost like what I'm doing a little more now, which is like organizing musicians to work together. So there was like a kind of like a band of maybe 15 or 20 people at one point, all different musicians from all across the university. I was at Santa Clara University, which wasn't a big university, but musicians who were not in the music department, basically just people who loved music. I was able to kind of get like all these people to come together and just jam out together. And like me and a bass player would just lay down a groove for an hour and there'd be like a line of people wanting to just improvise. And some of them didn't know much about music. They just wanted to like blow and just like play like crazy. Right. And so it was amazing. Like we ended up just kind of activating this like almost at times, I think it was 30 musicians going on stage. And so that was pretty fun. And it was just like, epic jam music. And I was like totally straight edge kid, man. I didn't drink alcohol or anything. Like I was just like, for some reason, I was just like super fired up. Like I wanted to kind of fill this need to just like improvise and play music with other people.
Wow.
And I think that as far as the improvising, that was something that like the department that I was in and the degree I was getting was really not into that. So that was a struggle that I really value, because I think that that showed me like you can just get a lot of shit done like just by your own volition, you know. And I think that was one of my first experiences of seeing that like the institution that I was a part of wasn't really working for my best interests, in the sense of like me defining my interests. And I think that once I got out of there, once I got my degree, I just moved to San Francisco, and I connected with, you know, gigging musicians who were just, you know, just hustling and working every night, you know, 2 or 3 gigs a day at every place there could be, and then going to some club late night and, you know, keeping up late night with the session and jamming with people. That was the scene I was really into for several years in San Francisco.
Nice.
And then Indian classical music kind of came into the picture.
So yeah, so how did that go for you then? Once you kind of got into that world of jamming and gigging regularly in the Bay Area?
It was cool, you know. I liked the early years of it. I went to, you know, I got to meet up with some great drummers and bass players. Marcus Shelby is a fantastic bass player that a lot of people know of from there. And he developed a great scene around him. And through a lot of the people, you know, around him, I was able to kind of get into a lot of other networks. And it was great. You know, I got to hear Eddie Marshall, who's an amazing drummer. He's on some Bobby Hutcherson records, and got to actually visit him and kind of get a lesson with him. And it was really just a lot of, you know, learning the songs. I think that was the part I never really wrapped my head around, was like the standards.
Yeah.
And being able to follow the form and being able to always kind of know the melody of the song, and use that as like a vehicle for improvising.
Yeah.
Like a good example, I think now that I think about a lot, is that song "Come Sunday" by Billy Strayhorn, and I started listening to the version with Mahalia Jackson off of Black, Brown, and Beige. I think is that what it's called. I can't remember the name of the record, but Mahalia Jackson and Duke Ellington.
Nice.
And I had to listen to that song quite a few times before I started to like really get what was happening with the feel and the time and how to like, you know, play it as a drummer. But the thing is, I had been called at a session years and years ago, like decades ago, right? So I didn't know what to play, and it was one of the few times where this band leader named Bishop Norman Williams, who was an amazing mentor to a lot of Bay Area musicians. He's no longer with us, but he was, you know, he was a real deal. He was from Kansas City, and he played with Dolphy and Freddie Hubbard, and so he was an amazing mentor. And he, you know, he looked at me and was like, just like, lay out, like, you know, he's like, you got to know this song. And so that was really formative for me, those kinds of experiences where I just got like schooled, you know, by people who I really respected, that weren't like accredited teachers at a school, you know, like these are people who just, they've been doing these songs their whole life. And a lot of times they were playing, you know, for very little money. And in the case of Bishop, you know, he lived in a hotel until the end of his life almost, you know. He never got out of that space where like you live in a hotel as a jazz musician, like in the Tenderloin.
Wow.
So that was very good for me to see, I think, like to drop him off at home and pick him up for the gig and take him home. And, you know, I would be playing like Coltrane Africa Brass, and, you know, I'm like 25 or something. And he's like in the back seat, this like, you know, 60-year-old dude, just like hollering, like just testifying in the back, you know, listening to Coltrane. And like, I'll always value those memories, you know, just doing those gigs with him. You know, he was the closest thing I think I had at that time to like getting close to the source of like the generations of musicians who are my idols. Yeah.
When was the last time you saw him?
Wow, it would have been like probably 2004, something like that, maybe 2003. Yeah, he lived a rough life though too, you know. But you know, it was like he influenced so many great musicians. I mean, there's so many people give him love in the Bay Area. So it's good. Yeah, if you ever go and you hear some musicians talking about the Bishop, that's the cat they're talking about, Bishop Norman Williams.
Wow.
Yeah.
So back when you linked up with Mark Carey in the Bay, at what point? Because I know you came here. The first time you came here to New York City was to work with him. So can you talk about, linking up with him the first time and how that moved into you moving here and then working with him, recording, touring, etc.?
Yeah, that's a very great memory. I mean, basically, we were starting to work together in the Bay Area. And so when he would come out and do gigs with like Russell Gunn or Stephon Harris, he would pop over and we would do sessions and we would also then like do gigs. He would linger back and we'd set up gigs. So that was really great because he took the time to make sure I understood, some of the other things that I was missing, right? Like some of the stuff that in New York is like a given. Certain kinds of ways that you embellish or certain kinds of things you do as a drummer that are like canon, right? But no one is really gonna like say that stuff to you, really. You know what I mean? You got to see other people do it. You have to just understand that like this is something that's done. Something as simple as just going like coming up to the downbeat. It's like 1, 2, 3, 4, so something like that was like. That had to be told to me in a way, right? Because I wasn't hearing a lot of drummers doing that in the Bay Area. So Mark was one of the cats that was like, okay, you need to really hone in on this specific thing. Listen to this Herbie record and realize this is Willie Bobo on drums, right? And so it's like, really interesting. And he is a brilliant teacher, right? So he was really able to encourage me to remain free and like exploratory in my nature, but also really acknowledge the roots and the history of the music. So he would talk to me a lot about Art Taylor and a lot about Betty Carter and a lot about Abbey Lincoln and Jackie McLean. And those are a lot more than his idols. Like those are direct people that he spent a lot of time with, So that was really great to hear from him and get to really like just ask him a lot about those experiences, and I think he felt good sharing that too, because I don't know if enough people appreciate his story, like and all the people that he brings to the table when he plays. So he was basically the one that was like, after a couple of years, around 2006, he said he was saying, come to New York. And I was just basically like, look, my parents are never going to agree to me moving to New York. My parents are very traditional Indian parents. They could barely deal with me being a musician. So like, to go to New York was like a whole nother ask. And in my mind, I sort of just saw it as impossible. And Mark was like, no, listen, like this is how it's done. Like I'll come over to your house and I'll talk to your folks and I'll explain to them everything that's going to go down. And
he was your jazz suitor. He courted you.
I mean, it was like he explained to me that was how it was done for him, right? And that was really like deep, I was like, wow. And for my parents, that was a level of reassurance that they needed.
Yeah.
To know that like when I landed in JFK, I'm going to Mark's house.
Yeah.
And that to them, I think they saw him in a different light at that point. They saw him as like someone who, would be family out there.
Yeah.
And so I was really lucky to have his support. And, and I basically took the chance, I took the chance too. And I said, I'm going to do it. And I came to New York. I moved up to Harlem and didn't know anyone other than Mark, basically. And
so what year are we talking?
That was 2006. So and that year was a struggle, because I think that to come to New York with a strong leader already kind of like having you in there and saying, oh, this is my drummer, and I brought him into town, that's a blessing. And I'm extremely grateful that Mark picked me. But it was also very, very hard for me to get my bearings across the whole scene in New York, right? Which is a massive scene, and it's very diverse. And I had never experienced something like that. Like I had never gone to a jazz school, and I had never been cut like I was in New York.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think that it was very hard that first year because I wanted to also feel like I didn't just have Mark's endorsement. Like I had other cats that endorsed me, and I think it took me a while to kind of break through a lot of the cliches. I think that honestly I had broken and shed a lot of those things in the Bay Area already. And then I kind of felt like I was swimming in those waters again when I came to New York. And that was really difficult for me because I think I kind of had to shed that skin all over again. And not sort of allow myself to be judged through other people's ideas and other people's eyes. And so that was something that took a while for me, but I think that part of what helped me get there, I think, was moving away from New York and going back to the Bay and connecting with a group of people who really weren't musicians. And I think that that's where I met my wife, and it was in Oakland. And it really involved living in a community of people that were from all walks of life. So a lot of them were in food justice. Some of them were in holistic medicine. Some of them were educators. Some of them were nonprofit workers. None of them were professional musicians. And that community, I think, helped me really get my bearings and helped me kind of crystallize a lot of my values and also gave me a comfortable space to push back on just the ideas I think that needed to be pushed back upon, which were I think I was sort of suffering from that struggle in New York. Was like the powers that be, right? Like those powers that were already there in New York were like kind of crushing me, right? And I was feeling that sense of like, I don't know how I'm gonna find my own footing here. And I think when I went back to the Bay and I lived in Oakland and just found that circle of people, I think it was really a way for me to feel like something can be built. Like you can build what it is that you need. And I think when I came to New York, I kind of had more of that attitude, and I felt a little more confident in knowing what I wanted to bring to New York. And I think it was cool because Mark, I think, always used to say that. He always so says that a lot too. It's like you can't come to New York expecting New York to give you something. You have to bring something to New York.
Yeah, he's right. Yeah. He's absolutely right. So as of the COVID happenings or lack of happenings all year that we've, you and I have been sort of collaborative on some of our endeavors throughout this time.
Definitely. We've been vibing.
Yeah. We did the record. We did the Unruly Neighbors record.
Yeah.
We're probably, there's talk that there'll be another one next year.
Oh,
right?
Yeah. I think I've heard that on
word on the
late
street.
Shows. Seth Meyers and all those guys were talking about it.
Right. And so aside from that, so this year, what else have you been up to? And what have you been up to lately, specifically?
Yeah. I think a lot of my work has just been solo oriented. Like I think other than the duo project that we did,
right,
I've really just been focusing on trying to make music with all the parts myself. And I've also been really fascinated by that process. Like I remember like listening to Stevie Wonder, and the first time I heard that, like, he played every instrument on there.
Oh yeah.
And I think there's a lot of other great examples of that. Like I think Shuggie Otis maybe played a lot of his own instruments on some of those records.
Sly Stone, I think.
Yeah.
On a bunch of his stuff.
So I kind of am intrigued by that, just because I feel like my own, I don't know. I guess lately I feel like everything is just like creatively exploding. Like I'm like trying to not do the stuff I normally do.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of that has to do with just wanting to go to somewhere else. I want to explore other types of sounds. I want to explore things that maybe are just not even necessarily typically associated with music making, like timbres and sounds and sound design. And, those kinds of ideas have been more intriguing for me. But I mean, I do like my sounds with a groove, so then the drum set is always kind of like a big part of what's happening there.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's been an interesting part. I've actually been like trying to simplify my social media a little bit more. Like I bailed on Facebook. And
Yes, I noticed.
kind of trying to like, yeah, just trying to like focus on like getting my music to people who care, right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
like I don't really care as much about like getting a bunch of followers and like having a lot of like, you know, likes and stuff. Like I think it's like cool to know that people are engaging with your stuff, but nowadays like the way that it's being engaged with feels so like just bubblegum
Yeah,
and very like just too quick to have there be any depth. And so
yeah.
I've been lately kind of gravitating a lot more towards fans who are engaged a little more on a serious level. Like on Patreon, for example, it's cool. You can kind of have discussions with your fans, and I've been enjoying that. Like I'll have like email exchange, you know, message exchanges with them through Patreon, which has been cool.
So let's plug your Patreon. What's that? And I'll post it
Yeah.
down here.
I mean,
What's
honestly, it's like the whole point of it is to basically be like, it costs you barely anything. It's like $1 a month.
what's the URL? Do you know the URL?
I think it's just Samir Gupta, or patreon.com/Samir Gupta.
Cool.
I could look it up real quick and double check, but I'll you know, we'll put it in the
We'll
in the
post it.
description.
Post it. Yes. So what's going on your Patreon? What are you
Well,
offering?
It kind of ebbs and flows, you know. I think that's why I wanted to price it so low. It's like I don't want to put any pressure on myself to be like, oh, I gotta like deliver some content to this,
Right.
like, you know. It's more just like I got like interesting playlists. I have moments where I suddenly have a weekend and I've generated a track, and I want to share that, and I'll end up putting it up there, and I'll end up compiling like different playlists. Like right now I have like lately I have like a couple of different cool playlists on Spotify that you can access through the Patreon page, right? So if you do a $1 a month, then you'll get the post which shares the Spotify link. So there's like I have a nice playlist that I've been bumping a lot, which is like I made one for Black Lives Matter, and it like opens up with some Pharaoh and just like really just a lot of like high energy, you know, jazz music. Has some like Charles Mingus up in there, like the Fables of Faubus with the original lyrics.
Yes.
You know, a lot of stuff that I think I just wanted to have in one place, you know, just ready for when the next messed up shit goes down.
Yes. Yeah.
It's like, it's so crazy. And then I think for a while, you know, it was so bad for a moment. Like there was just like every day there was like protests that were like turning into violent incidences. And I think I was going into a bit of a rabbit hole where I was finding like speeches by James Baldwin or Angela Davis or I think Malcolm X one in L.A.
I remember that. I remember you were doing those live streams with some of the
trying to produce tracks that were actually bring together different Indian classical recordings of the same raga. So it uses the same tone set and the same, you know, general mood and shape, but then I would like kind of pitch match those recordings to meet in some sort of one place. And so then when I do that, I could actually do really cool stuff. Like I could get Hari Prasad Chaurasian Bansuri, who would normally like could never play music with somebody like, you know, who's passed away, like just like generations later, or, you know, generations earlier before him. And I could like blend those two recordings, right? So you could have like sarangi and flute together, where maybe those two musicians never played together actually. So then it was a bit of production magic there. And then I would lay down some drums, and then I would like find a speech, even something by like Steve Biko, which is also very interesting for me because like South African history to me is very, it's like, oh, I wonder sometimes if like that's where the U.S. is headed, you know? And so I was like looking at Steve Biko's speeches, and kind of then I would float these speeches into the track. And then I would honestly just like live stream that stuff on Patreon, and I would be like, you know, I'm going to sit down here. It's Saturday night at 10 p.m. I'm going to live stream this and just improvise. And I was doing that on Twitch for a moment too. And yeah, and so now it's like YouTube. My YouTube channel has a lot of that stuff up there, which is just youtube.com/TablaJazz. TablaJazz is like the handle for all my stuff. Tried to keep it pretty simple.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it says it all right there.
Yeah, there's a funny story where this Indian classical vocalist who does like a lot of like hip other stuff, she was like, I think we were just like rolling in a car, and I put on some sort of like avant-garde like instrumental hip hop that I played in Japan, and she turns to me and she's like, "Oh, who's playing tabla on this?" And I was like, "Oh, there's no tabla on this recording. It's just me playing drum set, and there's a saxophonist, and there's a sort of a synth player." And she said, "No, there's tabla in here. I can hear it." I said, "No, there's no tabla in here." And she just was like, "It sounds exactly like there's tabla in this." And I was like, just fascinated by that. And I remember a few other people were saying that to me, like before I got into tabla. They were sort of like, "Yeah, it sounds like your drum set playing has some tabla." And at one point I was like, "See, now that's a funny microaggression." But then after a while I was like, I wonder if there's something there. And I started to kind of check it out and got into tabla, in fact. And it really grabbed me pretty hard. And then when I listened back to some of those old recordings of before I learned tabla, now I kind of can hear that a little bit.
That's interesting.
Like, there's some phrasing there that's like naturally almost like some tabla phrasing, and it's like just awkward enough where you're sort of like, that doesn't really sound like what a jazz drummer would do typically, so it's very interesting. I kind of wonder whether people were, hearing something back then. They may have.
Yeah, I don't know.
The jazz, baby.
So what do you think's happening? What do you think's going to happen next? What do you want to see happen next? What are you going to sort of push forward with in the next coming months?
Oh, that's a good question, Ben. I mean, it's like hard, I have to say there's a few things I want to tie up, like I basically put out a record called Namaskar in like 2010.
Mm-hmm.
And the purpose of that was to kind of tap these golden era Bollywood songs, which are like from the 50s and the 60s. And the reason why that era of Bollywood is cool is because they actually use Indian classical music quite a bit. A lot of the melodies of those songs are very, very Indian classical influenced, raga influenced. And also on some of them, actually very famous Indian classical singers and semi-classical singers sing on those soundtracks. And so it's really a very rich sort of repertoire, which to me reminds me of like the jazz songbook, right? Like the book of standards, where there actually are quite a few musicals which have contributed songs to the jazz canon. So I kind of saw a parallel there. And I said, you know what, I'm going to get a jazz group to treat these Bollywood, golden era Bollywood songs as if they're jazz standards, and fill out a form and make a single page chart and come up with what the chords would be that a jazz pianist could play, and kind of put out this record. And so I did that on Namaskar, and then I also did a follow up to that on a record called A Circle Has No Beginning, which I'm actually wearing the album cover.
Yes. Now that's 2018 self-released, yeah?
Yeah, that was totally self-released. The first one was released on Motema Music.
Right, that's right.
And this Circle Has No Beginning was self-released. And I want to do a third and final kind of chapter in that. Because there's probably about 4 more songs or so that I want to do versions of. And so that I think is something I'd like to do. I was considering doing that as a solo project, but honestly, like Mark Carey has been such a huge part of that from day one that I kind of want to have Mark on there for the third and final chapter.
You almost said the third book.
I know. No,
I like that.
Lord of the Rings. This would be the return of the
No, the third book.
Yeah. No, or it could be many, many books, but the trilogy is always the way.
Yes, I love. Yeah, you got to get Mark on it. You got to get him.
I think so. I mean, Mark to me is one of those cats who was able to really effectively find that middle path between how do you support in a jazz setting and how do you support in an Indian classical setting, right? And how do you serve those two different kinds of music, which really are coming at it in a different way. Like I've gotten some phenomenal jazz pianists to try and play with raga musicians, and it doesn't work sometimes, and sometimes the reason I think it doesn't work is because the jazz mentality sometimes is very harmonically driven.
Yes.
And I think that sometimes there's an attempt to almost expand it out outward to like encompass all the pitches, right? Like sort of like the logical extent of harmonic overtone series is almost like 12-tone music. And so it's really interesting to hear like a jazz musician be able to vibe. I'm like, no, this is just a straight up D minor chord. And he's like, oh, well, I could do this and this. And
Yeah.
this and this and I'm
Right.
like, oh my gosh, like the whole band is like totally like bogged down in this thing. And then Mark will come in there and it'll just suddenly like just lift up and take off. And there's no like, there's no sense of like, look what I can do. It's almost more just like, oh yeah, like this, we all know this song. Like all we need to do is lift it up. Like all we got to do is, you know, give it a little push and then it's going to take off. And it's sort of like that thing where it just doesn't take much, but like to have the sensitivity to know that there's like a limit almost. Mark has that. And I wonder if, you know, he played and supported so many great jazz vocalists.
Yes.
Like Eddie Carter, Abbey Lincoln, just to name a few. But like, you know, he knows that like the voice is what will always kind of carry the song in a way, you know, like, and how do you support that quality, even if an instrument is sort of emulating the voice or modeled on the way that the voice would do it, right? Which is the way Indian classical music works. It's the reason why there's so much bending of Indian classical music and bending of pitches and bending of notes, is because it's really meant to reflect the voice. So Mark, I feel like maybe he's tapping into that, you know, and he's able to see like, how do you just support that lyric or line or melody, right? Just the linear side. Yeah, and I would be, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? I would be remiss, I believe is the word, if I didn't
Yes.
mention that Mark really helped me with this great song that I wrote a long, long time ago called Taiwa.
Yes, I was thinking
And,
of that one.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
and that song was written for a jazz pianist from South Africa named Moses Molalekwa, and he was someone that I got turned on to in college, and he was just awesome. He was like young, he was super into Monk and you know, Herbie, as well as like Abdullah Ibrahim and all of the, you know, defining South African jazz legends. And like he was just one of those cats. Like I would hear about how Moses is like got his weekly at the bass line in Johannesburg, and it's like just packed. And it's like I was just like, oh my God, I need to go meet this guy. Like I need to go meet him and tell him that I want to play with him. And that was like, I was kind of obsessed with that in college and coming out of college. And then actually he died, and he died at such a young age. It was so tragic. And I ended up going to South Africa a few years later anyway. And I remember, you know, feeling really sad, but there was like a song that was sort of, I was hearing, and I remember coming back and writing it out and trying to like write a song around this melody. And then I met Mark, and Mark was like, you know, what songs have you written or something? And I was like, well, this is a song I wrote. I don't remember if he asked or I just showed him. And he checked it out and he played it, and I was sort of struggling with trying to explain to him how it didn't feel like a big deal other than this first line. Like I was like, the first line's all I care about, right? Like, you know, like the rest of it I don't really care. And he's like, well then fuck the rest of it, just like keep the first line, like that's the whole song to you. And I was like, okay, well, what do you think? And he's like, well, this is the chords. And I was like, oh, well, I don't know the chords. He's like, no. He's like, I'm telling you, like these are the chords. like the melody itself, like has chords.
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And
yeah.
he's like, you don't need to tell me what the chords are. Like I can hear the chords. And so that was like 4 years of like music education suddenly like packed into one sentence. You know,
Yeah.
I was like, oh my God, like I didn't realize that. So then I was like learning the chords that he told me, and I was like, holy crap, like all these things started making sense. And that song really has been like a defining song in a lot of our sets, all the way from like 2002 or 2003 when we first met. We've been playing that song, and it was really great. I mean, he showed that song to Stefan Harris and the Blackout Band, and through Casey Benjamin, who's an amazing saxophonist.
Yeah.
That song kind of had new life breathed into it through Robert Glasper and Stephon Harris. And those guys, you know, it ended up having a different name at one point called For You, which is funny because, like, there was a period of time where people would come up to our bass player, Rashawn Carter, from the Mark Carey Focus Trio, and people would say, oh, that was really cool how you guys played For You. And he was like, wait a minute, like, that song was Taiwa. That wasn't For You. Like, these, like, and it was very interesting how he'd be like, oh, man, you got to know about Taiwa. Like, you know?
Yeah.
And then I'm like, wait a minute. Like,
he was evangelizing Taiwa. Yeah.
So it's really been a journey with that song. And
Wow.
honestly, sometimes I think to myself, like, even if that's the one song that I write, you know, that's cool. Like,
It's funny. It's almost like it's like that. It was a gift to you to open your life up in a way. You know?
I kind of feel that way. Like, I was like, man, like, how could a song come so strong, you know? And Mark was just really affected by that melody too, you know? And,
Yeah.
and even Moses' son, who's also a great pianist and a young pianist in New York City, he moved here from South Africa.
Mm-hmm.
He also reached out to me, and we've been in touch, and he's like, you know, he likes that song too, and it's very beautiful to know that, like, Moses' son is, like, you know, has heard that song too. So that song, I think, alone has an important part of my story in there. Yeah.
Wow. Cool, man.
Yeah.
Well, I know I'm looking forward to the final chapter in the trilogy.
Yeah.
And then after that, the second trilogy and the third trilogy, the prequel trilogy.
Yeah, it's like, it's going to be like the Harry Potter series. It'll be like a mix of Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, and my other obsession, which is The Dark Tower by Stephen King.
Oh,
if
wow.
we're going to go full nerd, I'm happy to go there with you, Ben. I mean,
I don't think
at
I
this
can.
point, people have listened for an hour and a half almost.
I don't think I can compete. I don't think I can hang because I'm sad to say I'm not really that into Lord of the Rings. I don't know why.
I'm sad to hear it, Ben. I'm sad to hear it because we could go for a long time.
We could, right? So
Yeah,
I'm
it's
hoping.
it's all good.
I'm hoping we get to do another record.
I think we have to. I think the duo vibe we have is really cool.
Yes,
And we did a thing on the driveway, right, the other day.
yeah, I wanted to say about that. It was kind of, well, because since COVID, I've probably had about 4 gigs with people outside. That may have been the last one.
Yeah. We shut it down.
They all felt weird, I have to say.
Yeah.
In like almost like you know, like if you don't go ice skating, if you ice skate and you're really good at it, and then you don't go for a while, and you're like, oh wait, it's like you're finding your legs again or something.
Totally.
That's how it kind of felt. It was like, oh yeah, I know this, but why does it feel so? But it was enjoyable. But I feel like one of the levels of why it's such a bummer to not be able to perform is that right when everything stopped, I felt like I had gotten into this really new place with performing and with music and with playing with people. Maybe it was somewhat of a peak or somewhat of a, I would even say somewhat of a depth. And then it's almost like those Etch-a-Sketch. It's like you shake the, you know what I'm talking about? And it's
Totally.
all like clean slate.
For me, it was also kind of similar. I mean, my daughter, my younger one, turned just about a year old. And you know, that first year is like a pretty big marker. I mean, it's like we just, like, this kid survived a year. Like, we didn't, you know, like we can take a little credit and maybe we can like take a minute to catch our breath. And so in my mind, I was like, oh man, maybe I can like do some gigs, like, you know,
Yeah.
go out.
Right.
And so then the quarantine hit, and it was like, oh, I guess we're staying home now again. Which is actually kind of amazing, because like if I wasn't staying home right now, like she would be in some sort of daycare, and you know, and now it's like I just see her all day, which is so cool because she's just like into everything, you know, like she'll hit the piano, she'll be on the piano multiple times a day, and she's like 20 months right now or something.
Wow.
And she's behind the instrument some days more than I am. Yeah.
She's gonna take all your gigs.
I just want my cut.
Cool, man. Well, it was good to talk to you. I feel like I'm in like this Samir zone where I'm like, oh man, there's lots of lessons here. I got to talk to Samir like this more often.
Well, good luck with your podcast. This is exciting, man. I can't wait to see who else you get up here.
Well, a lot of people are going to do it. And I'm excited. And one of the things I'm realizing is like my initial intention was like, I want more people to know about the people that I know and love and talk to anyway. But now I'm realizing like, I'm going to learn a whole lot from doing this. You know, I've learned a whole lot just by talking to you now, and we talk pretty regularly. So
there you go.
Yeah.
Man. Well, thank you for inviting me, Ben. It's been a real privilege, man.
Thank you. And yeah, you know, I love you. I got your back. When there's a rumble, just give me a call. I'm there.
Straight up West Side Story up in here.
Exactly.
That sounds great, man. Thank you, Ben.
Real quick, what's your website?
So my website is sameergupta.com. It's SAMEERGUPTA.
We're going to put that right here.
Somewhere.
Yes.
And I'm also on SoundCloud. I've been throwing up some tracks on SoundCloud, some of my more recent stuff. So that's just soundcloud.com/tablajazz. And Twitter is where I will sometimes post without any filter.
Yes, I enjoy that. I enjoy your Twitter.
And then Instagram is where, that's like where I'll just post too many pictures of my kids like playing crazy instruments and stuff.
Right.
With an occasional clip of me playing something maybe.
And to everyone out there, you can check out our record on Samir Gupta and Ben Tyree, Unruly Neighbors. It's on all the streamers, all the evil streamers. Yeah, please get it on Bandcamp.
Is the place. SameerGupta.bandcamp.com is where it's at.
Yeah, and most of your other stuff is up there, right?
Yeah, like Bandcamp is basically my store. I'm like a believer in Bandcamp.
I love Bandcamp. I love it.
Just recently I posted something which was showing how Bandcamp is rethinking their model of like best of 2020.
Mm-hmm.
So that was really cool to read. I mean, honestly, if I were ever to go back into like, you know, a corporate workforce, like Bandcamp would maybe be at the top of my list.
Yeah, I could see that.
Like, I've worked at Apple and Pandora and like, you know, I worked at places before, and Bandcamp stands apart, man. I'm like super impressed with it.
Yeah, Bandcamp is dope. Anytime any of you see anything on Bandcamp, get it at Bandcamp first, because it goes to the artist, and the small cut Bandcamp gets, it's worth it, because it goes to perpetuate Bandcamp.
Totally worth it.
Cool, man. Thank you.
Peace.
We'll talk soon.
Good to see you.
All right, you too.
All right, take care.
Hey, so thank you so much for joining us. I want to thank Samir Gupta for being my guest tonight. Remember, please subscribe. Click the red button if you're on YouTube. Stay in touch at www.bentyree.net. If you want to help support the show and help us keep our lights on, you can donate at Venmo, Ben Tyree, Cash App, $Ben Tyree. Thanks again. Keep in touch. Keep watching. You'll notice this clock behind me right there on the bookshelf will be different from time to time because I pre-record all the intros and outros. The whole show is pre-recorded. This is December here in Brooklyn, New York. You're going to see this in January. A new year, a new administration, a new you. Keep in touch. Peace.